Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Hernandez from United Spinal Association.
Hi, I'm Jessica with BCID.
Today we have Steve Lieberman from the National Chapter of United Spinal Association here to talk about advocacy and how our voices can all come together to create a louder voice. But before I pass it off to him, we're going to go over some ground rules.
Yes, yes, yes. As always, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section down at the bottom. You can always chat amongst yourselves in the chat box. But any questions, try to put them in the Q&A so that we can get to them and they don't get lost in the conversation. We do have ASL and they will be here shortly. They are running a little bit late, but we also have the closed captioning feature button that you can go ahead and press. And oh boy, I'm sorry about that. And the link to Otter AI in the chat box.
I will put it in the chat right now. So we have live transcription. So, Steve, please introduce yourself and tell us how we can raise our voices louder by unifying.
All right. How you doing, everybody? Good afternoon. I'm Steve Lieberman. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy for United Spinal Association, based out of our DC office. I now live in the suburbs in Bethesda, Maryland, where I moved a couple of months ago, but I was in DC before that. And prior to joining United Spinal in August of 2019, I spent 10 years on Capitol Hill as a staffer for Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, where I spent the last 6 years of my tenure there working on healthcare policy, policy for children, women, seniors, and people with disabilities. I'm a member of the disability community myself because I'm autistic, and I came to the disability advocacy path in my life. It was a very interesting path for me as I came to terms with my own disability and where I fit in terms of the community. So when I was on Capitol Hill interacting with folks in the disability community, and then as time went on and I started to find myself drawn more towards the advocacy element rather than staying on Capitol Hill. And I'll never forget, I went and visited my grandmother in New Jersey, and she keeps the obituary for her mother in her bedroom. And I was reading it, and it talked about how my great-grandmother in the 1930s was a disability advocate because my great uncle was a polio survivor. And she went to Washington to advocate for employment for people with disabilities. And so that sort of crystallized in my mind at that time. Oh, wait, this is where I need to be. This is where I belong. This is what I want to do. I want to be involved in disability advocacy and educating folks in the disability community about how you can affect change, how you can effectively advocate and lobby your elected officials. So I'm incredibly happy that I made the jump when I did. And I'm happy I'm able to talk to you all today about effective ways to advocate for lasting change. So I'm going to.
Before you go into your PowerPoint presentation, I want to ask you a question.
Yep.
I know that you've worked with Senator Menendez, you said?
Yep.
Tell those who don't know how to advocate, why is it important to speak to the elected officials? They might feel intimidated and unsure of, how to approach them. why and how is the best approach to go to your elected official.
Yeah.
And, not to feel offended if they are not available and speaking to one of the legislative assistants.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna get into that
Okay.
as part of my presentation, but I mean, it's so important. It's so important to I mean, advocacy is all, what it's all about is, communicating your needs to folks who might not, if you don't speak up, they're not going to know your situation. They're not going to know what's going on in your life. They might not know that there's a problem, whatever problem you're dealing with. And so, the fact that somebody comes and speaks up and raises those issues, raises those problems, and alerts folks to the fact that there is something going on. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. That's it's at its most basic. I mean, when you think about you know let's say, I mean, for example, I mean, taking the example of let's say a pothole, you might think, oh, well, however many cars go over this pothole every day, surely somebody has said something. Well, maybe not. Maybe nobody has, alerted the relevant authorities that, there is a pothole on such and such street at such and such avenue, right? It only takes one person to raise their voice to let somebody know that there's a problem, but not everybody takes the time to do it. And so if you take the time to raise your voice, if you take the time to alert those folks who are in charge, and whether it's, the person who's elected or somebody who works for them, who, I mean, in most respects, I mean, the staffers, the people that work for them are the people that actually get things done. I mean, the elected officials, I mean, they have a lot of power, but they empower their staffers through their office to get all this stuff done. So I mean, as a former staffer, I mean, there was a lot that I could do myself because I was empowered by my boss to get it done.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh,
I just want to throw something in really quickly. I remember when I started working at BCID, right at the beginning, I was fortunate enough to join Jose to go on roll on Capitol Hill. And that was my first time speaking with people and being introduced to that. And it was, I was so, I don't know if you remember, Jose, I was so scared, quiet, I didn't want to say anything. And George was like, go ahead, talk. And I was just like, but it's so empowering. When you talk and and they hear you and they actually listen and they don't realize, the concerns and the issues that we have. So I got over that fear. And now I'm like, hey, you want to talk to me?
now she schedules meetings with state elected officials all the time.
There you go. That's what you got to do.
All right, Steve, take it away.
All right, let me share my screen here. Okay. Let me move this around. There we go. Okay. So what makes an advocate, right? There are many different forms and styles of advocacy, but at its most basic level, all advocacy is about asking for something. And the fundamental goal of advocacy is communicating a need to someone in a position to help who may not otherwise be aware of that need. Now, you don't have to be loud or well-known or use, civil disobedience tactics to be an effective advocate. There are many different tools in the advocacy toolbox, and it's really dependent on the situation, what you pull out of that toolbox. And the most effective advocates are consistent but persistent. And the most important thing for an advocate to do is keep showing up. Now, there's different methods of advocacy, right? So there's direct action, which, is, for example, getting arrested, laying down in the street, chaining yourself to a fence. The folks that came down in 2017, to fight against the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, pulled out of their wheelchairs. Very effective at drawing attention and demonstrating ongoing or potential harm. It's less effective at securing positive legislative change. You're not going to win a lot of people onto your side for specific legislation if you use the tactics that you use in that instance for another instance, right? And I'll get to that in a second. Legal advocacy, so use of the courts and legal system to secure rights, which can secure change large and small. It can also take a long time. Cases wind their way through the courts, and it's a lot of stop and start. There's hearings, there's briefs, but then you have to wait a while for hearings or decisions. And so, I mean, it can be frustrating for a lot of folks because it can take time and it's not always a guarantee of success. And legislative advocacy, which I'm most familiar with, is, it's often necessary based on how the change is meant to be secured, that it requires a change in the law. So, in particular, in issues of funding, securing funding for different programs. You go through the legislative process and the appropriations process, visiting members of Congress or members of the state legislature on, getting funding for specific programs. And it may take years to build relationships and momentum for a specific issue or for a specific funding stream, but it can result in sweeping, lasting change if you do it right. And the process can be sped up if you've got the right tactics that you're using. And it's important to understand, different advocacy tools work best in different situations. So, as I was communicating, for example, I could bring out the example of the Disability Integration Act, which was a bill that a bunch of folks in the disability community were trying to get passed back in 2019. And unfortunately, they, the folks that were most out in front of that and were, they were using a lot of direct action tactics to try and build support for it, but then it all blew up in their face. It backfired. And I was right in the middle of it. So I remember very clearly exactly how it backfired on them. They angered the wrong person. The one person who would be the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House of Representatives, Frank Pallone, they went to his house, his DC residence, which, if you know Congress, your residence in Washington, D.C. particularly, but in general, your residence is off limits, but your residence in Washington, D.C. in particular can be a closely guarded secret. And so if you've got people showing up at your DC residence, you're really not going to be inclined to listen to what they have to say. But, they showed up before dawn using, direct action tactics, chanting, trespassing on his porch. And, as a result, his opposition to the bill at that time was not a hardened position. He could have been won over with the right kind of advocacy. But, that pushed him over the edge and said, no, I'm not going to move this bill. And so that killed the bill. And it's unfortunate, but, and I know about it because at the time I was trying to get Senator Menendez to be a co-sponsor of that bill. And I had to have 3 separate conversations with him to assuage his concerns after that incident, because Frank Pallone is a fellow member of the New Jersey delegation. So he heard about it directly from Congressman Pallone. So it was only after 3 separate conversations that he agreed to co-sponsor the bill. And there was a whole lot of, smoothing over that needed to be done between the offices when that happened. And I could go on, but it's just important to understand there's different times for different tactics. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to mostly focus on the legislative advocacy aspect, because that's what I'm, very familiar with, but also I think it's really, you can do a lot going that route. So the importance of showing up in terms of Congress, congressional offices are fast-paced environments, and congressional staff will only pay attention to groups who engage their office directly. And so they place a lot of importance on hearing from constituents. Now, if you're, say, somebody from, Colorado, and you're like, oh, well, I'm, an advocate, and I'm going to go visit, as many offices, as I can, call, offices that are not from my state, you're not going to get very far. I mean, most offices, for example, they'll screen out calls or emails that are not from their district or from their state. They really, really want to hear from the people back home. So, I mean, and applying this to United Spinal, if congressional offices only hear from United Spinal once a year at the Royal Capitol Hill, which is a great event, I mean, if it's only once a year, they'll see us as a box to check and not think about us the rest of the year. And so that's why it's so important to, when United Spinal, I mean, when we send out our action alerts throughout the year, and that's a way of continually staying engaged throughout the year with these offices to demonstrate our commitment to our issues. So I know from, having been a staffer all those years, I mean, there were groups that I would only hear from once a year when they came and visited for their fly-in, and that I wouldn't get any emails from them the rest of the year. And so I'd be like, oh, how committed are you to advancing your goal? How much support do you really have outside of the people that are in this room? So, a lot of offices will, they'll focus on, well, how many emails or phone calls am I getting on a specific issue? How inclined am I to support this? What is the real depth of support from back home? It's a very, very important consideration for congressional offices. And it's something you really have to pay attention to and think about. So what is a typical meeting like when you're meeting a congressional office? So meetings are generally set up weeks or months ahead of time. And so the staffer will come out and they'll greet the advocates. They'll go into their conference room, and the advocates will make their asks. What are they asking for? And so the staffer will respond based on their boss's record and what they can commit to in that moment. Most of the time, the staffer that you meet with are not going to be able to make any sweeping commitments. They'll have to go back to the people above them and talk it over, and they'll present their arguments. And sometimes those arguments can go on for days or even weeks back and forth via email. And I know, because I dealt with so many of them. But it's, just something you got to think about as an advocate, putting yourself in the staffer's shoes in terms of what they have to do. So the staffer will review the ask and may or may not take action based on several factors. So how do congressional offices make decisions? So peeling back the curtain a little bit, right? So there's what in congressional speak, it's called running the traps. So it's what do the data say? What's the impact on the state or the district, and who supports or opposes? So it's, figuring out, okay, are there any landmines here? Are there any, if I'm gonna, if my boss is gonna support a bill, for example, is there a group out there that opposes it? If so, why? What are the potential risks in supporting this bill or opposing the bill? So they got to take all that into account, and running that all down may take a little bit of time, especially if you got to, get somebody on the phone or communicate via email and figure out, what somebody's position is. Because there's an internal approval process within the office. So usually what happens is the staffer that handles the issue, usually a legislative assistant, will put together an email to their legislative director, and lay everything out, asking, basically saying, here's why, our boss should support this bill, co-sponsor the bill. and it'll lay out, what is the exact, what's the nature of the bill, what's the history behind the issue, and all the data and everything that you run down. So you consider, as you're making these decisions, what's the member's history on the issue. So there may be bills, from years before that are somewhat similar. Is there a demonstrated history of support on a particular kind of issue? And that's a point in favor if so. Have there been in-person or now virtual meetings asking for support? So the importance of the meeting, I think, can't be overstated. Offices really want to hear from their constituents directly on these issues. Has the office received emails and phone calls on the issue from back home, and how many? And to go back to the Disability Integration Act example, and what is the ratio of support versus opposed from constituents? To go back to that example, so at the time, back in 2019, and I was trying to get Senator Menendez to co-sponsor this bill. The question was put, well, so how many people have written in or sent or made phone calls on the Disability Integration Act from New Jersey? And so we went and looked, and of the people that had written in or made phone calls, there were about a dozen or so people that had written in favor of the DIA, and about 66% against, not what percent, 66 people against. So, I mean, it was a lopsided ratio of people against. So, it was hard then to justify, how could the senator co-sponsor the bill when, from the folks back home, the sentiment was running overwhelmingly against. Now, the people who'd written it against, I mean, and I could, go on and on with, with my colleagues at the time, these were overwhelmingly folks from VOR. And, I explained, exactly what VOR's position is and their position within or without the disability community, and how they were, they're over here and they're not in the mainstream, and et cetera. But, I did something that was a bit unorthodox. I actually called a SIL in New Jersey, and I said, you guys need to get on the phone. You need to get your people to send emails, and we got to make up this gap. We need to reverse this. Otherwise, we're not going to support the bill because I can't justify it. And so, to their credit, they did. They got about 40 or so people to write in and make phone calls. And so then I was able to go back and say, hey, look at all these people that have now written in.
But I want to interrupt then, just for those who don't know, a SIL is a Center for Independent Living. So it's like Jessica works for BCID, which is just another name for an independent living center.
Right.
Sorry.
Thanks, Jose. So, yeah, I mean, and, at that point, I was able to get the senator to co-sponsor the bill after I had to talk to him three times. But so, yeah, I mean, it's so important. And then again, what does the data show about how constituents are affected? I mean, it's, congressional offices love data, and they love, state-specific data, or even district-specific data if you can get it, although that's much rarer. But data is very important. And so, case studies on effective advocates. So in my experience, the best advocates are pesky without being rude. If you're persistent, and you follow up and you do all that you need to do in terms of, making sure that, the staffers' attention, I mean, they don't forget about you. and without going overboard. I mean, that's a great way to get them to, move and do what you are looking for them to do. So in
Yeah.
person and now virtual meetings with staffers are essential.
And also follow up, like
Yeah,
you're saying, make sure that after you have that visit with the elected official, you say, when is a good time to follow up with your office to check in on the status of this, whether you get an answer or not.
exactly.
Would you mind answering the questions? Probably pertains to some of this.
Yeah.
So Josh writes in, is there any particular evidence we can bring to a meeting that is more beneficial for advocates besides simply telling them what we want something to change and argue the benefit and history behind the decision? So like in the case of United Spinal, like when we go into a visit,
Yeah.
we go in with evidence-based, and in policy.
Right.
And usually we have our members tell the story backing that evidence up. So
Yeah.
when he says, what evidence can we bring in?
Yeah.
I guess it all depends on the situation.
It depends on the issue, right? So if you're, for example, let's say we're talking about discrimination by ride-sharing companies against wheelchair users, right? So I know United Spinal, for example, did a survey on that particular issue a couple years ago. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to bring in, a survey of people showing, how many people had been, had, a ride hailing vehicle pull up and see that it's a wheelchair user and then pull away, or, that they didn't secure the wheelchair properly if it's an accessible vehicle. Those kinds of things are, data points are so important if you have them. But again, it all depends on the issue. And so you want to bring things that are pertinent to that specific issue with you if you have them. Okay. So continuing on here, so understand it's both up to you to convince the staffer and up to the staffer to convince their bosses on whatever issue you're talking about. Work with them. Staffers are always looking. They're always looking for two things. They're looking to make themselves look good within the office, and they're looking to make their boss look good on policy and politically. So if you can convince the staffer that the issue you're bringing in is beneficial to their boss, that'll go a long way. But also, if you can convince the staffer that supporting this particular issue or getting more experienced on, and when we're talking about disability policy here, if you can convince the staffer that focusing more on disability issues will give them a niche within their office in terms of how they can then advance themselves and advance their careers, which in my mind, there are far too few staffers that have that disability policy lens that they're applying. And it's only to their benefit if they can learn about these disability issues. Given that we're a quarter of the population in this country, the largest minority in this country, it's only to their benefit if they get more educated and advance their own agenda in terms of getting more involved in disability issues themselves. So as stated, following up with a staffer, so important. Usually it's a good time to follow up is about a week after. is probably a good time to follow up with a staffer on an issue. If possible, demonstrate strength by getting constituents to email or call. So if you can combine, and I think this is in terms of a comprehensive advocacy strategy, if you can combine a meeting with emails and phone calls that are timed around the meeting. So let's say if you can get folks to email or call in, let's say a week before, and then let's say follow up in the days after, you can then demonstrate to the staffer that you have the breadth of support and the commitment to that issue, that they'll then want to move and say, okay, we have, if the member, in this case, member of Congress, if the member of Congress doesn't have a history of supporting disability issues, and most offices, they'll go by, well, what's the history, right? And if we don't have a history on this, then, you're sort of out over the ledge in terms of, if you want to, go in a new direction. But if you can convince the staffer that there's a breadth of support here at home for this issue, then they'll want to then go with you. Know your deadlines if applicable. So particularly on issues of appropriations and funding, there's an appropriations process that goes on both at the federal level and at the state level. And so it's important to know, what are the deadlines for getting in submissions for the appropriations process. Because if you don't meet those deadlines, then you're probably out of luck. But it's important to know those so that you can then focus your energy before the deadline and getting folks to call and write in, and then follow up via email with the staffer so that you can try and get for example, get their boss to sign on to a letter supporting, let's say, supporting spinal cord injury model systems, for example. And know when to pull back. Don't burn your bridges. This was something that I saw a number of times as a staffer. There would be people that went too far. I can give the example of somebody who was advocating for a bill on ectodermal dysplasia. And they went over the line, calling the young folks who sit up front, answering the phones and using foul language with them, and verbally abusing them. And after that, you can't condone something like that. And so even if the bill that they were supporting might have been a good bill, the office couldn't sign on at that point because the advocate had behaved in a really poor manner, and just had to tell them, based on what you did, we're not going to co-sponsor. So just make sure that in dealing with with staffers, with offices, that be persistent, but please be courteous. So for United Spinal, how do we apply these lessons for us? So United Spinal needs a critical mass of consistent and engaged advocates in every congressional district around the country. And we need constituent ambassadors who can provide the SCID perspective for congressional offices if they have questions. So by applying consistent pressure and cultivating relationships with congressional offices, we gain more allies on Capitol Hill and achieve better outcomes. So building our grassroots network, this is something that I've been really focused on as part of what I do here at United Spinal. We want advocates who can commit is sending in United Spinal's action alerts to their members of Congress. It's so important that congressional offices hear from us, because as I said, if we don't speak up, they're not going to know what we care about. They're not going to know what issues face this community. They're not going to know the potential solutions to those problems that we're presenting to them. And so it's so important that every member of Congress hears what we have to say, what we are advocating for, because you never know until you try, until you communicate that. You never know who might support you. You never know, there might be somebody who has a connection that you didn't even know about. And so casting the widest net possible in terms of support is so critical. So we also want at least one SCID ambassador in every congressional district. So, I mean, the idea here is not only do we want to make sure that our ideas are communicated, that our the issues that we care about are communicated, but we want to make sure that if a congressional office has questions, they want the perspective of this community, we want to make sure that there's somebody they can turn to and build a connection with, build a relationship with. And if they have questions on how a particular bill or issue might affect somebody from this community, they can turn to that person and call them up and say, hey, how would this affect you? How would this affect somebody from your community? And so it's so important that we have people who begin building bridges with their members of Congress and be that resource for them. And then, offices, frequently will turn to folks like that and say, hey, I'd like you to, join, I'd like you to join me for an event we're holding, in the district on a particular issue. Can you come and share your story? Can you come be a part of a roundtable with the congressman, the congresswoman, with the senator? And that happens frequently. And so, we want to make sure that we're starting to build those relationships with grassroots advocates all across the country. So our initial goals for this program, we want at least one person, one grassroots advocate that we sign up in every district. But then we want to build it to a critical mass. So, 5 advocates per district, I think is a good goal to have, just based on, my experiences with, what the thresholds are in terms of how many emails an office gets before they say, hey, we need to start listening to these people, listen to this group. And I think we can do it. We just got to get folks signed up all across the country, in New York and all over the place. So eventually we want to take this model and scale it down for state level advocacy as well. I mean, it's the same principle applies here. We want to cast the widest net possible. We want to make sure we have folks in every district talking to every legislator. We want to make sure that we're communicating that message to, all legislators across the country. So right now, we've been, really pushing this program, certainly since last summer. But right now we have 353 registered advocates in 216 congressional districts, so just shy of a majority. There's 435 congressional districts, 218 is a majority. We're just shy of a majority of congressional districts, and across 41 states. So we're still looking for those last 9 states to get advocates in, and I can now show you guys the map. Oh, wait, the map is the next slide. So this is our 75th anniversary for United Spinal. And so we're conducting 2 challenges for the advocacy and policy department. So we've got our 75th anniversary advocacy challenge. So we're looking to increase engagement, register more advocates, and build our movement. And so we have prizes for chapters and prizes for advocates as part of our advocacy challenge, which we will be awarding towards the end of the year. So for chapters, those chapters that register the most advocates through our district mobilization program, what I was just talking about, and for those the chapter that sends in the most action alerts within their chapter area. So, whether it's, a chapter that covers a state or multiple states or part of a state, if the chapter that sends in the most action alerts within their area, they'll get a prize, as well as the chapter that registers the most advocates with us. And then advocates, individual advocates will get a prize, even if you just sign up for our district mobilization program. And I will put the link in the chat in a little bit. But if you register as an advocate, you'll be entered for a chance to win that prize. And the advocate that sends the most action alerts throughout this year will also win a prize, which I think is more of an Advocate of the Year prize, and we'll be awarding that towards the end of the year. And then we also have our recognition challenge. So we are on the federal level working to get recognition of United Spinal's 75th anniversary. So we're looking to get folks around the country to help celebrate our 75th anniversary through resolutions or proclamations. And we have a template that you can use for that. It's up on our website. But for the chapter or advocate who introduces or passes a resolution within their state legislature, you'll be entered in our drawing for that prize. And then for those folks who get a proclamation from their mayor on our 75th anniversary, you'll also be entered for a prize. And let me now show you our map. So if you look at this map here, you'll see we have advocates in most states around the country. We're only missing 9 states. But we have, in several states, we have advocates registered in every district. We have, for example, Oregon, Iowa, Louisiana, New Hampshire, Vermont, Wyoming. But we have, as I said, we have advocates in 216 out of our 435 districts. We're working to get advocates registered in every single district. So we would very much like all of your help, everyone who's on this call today. And it doesn't matter that we already have folks sign up in your district. We want everybody, as many people to get registered with us to send in our action alerts, because the more people we have, the more powerful we are, the bigger of an impact we will have. So we want, sign yourselves up, sign up your friends, sign up your family members. We want all comers, as many people as possible. And let me just, since this is a New York focused call, although I know we have folks from other states on the call, just wanted to focus on New York for a second here. So looking at New York, we have currently 44 registered advocates in 20 out of 27 congressional districts. And as you can see, in downstate New York, almost every district we have registered advocates. There are only 2 districts in downstate New York that do not currently have anybody registered. They are Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez's district, New York 7, and Congressman Hakeem Jeffries' district, New York 8. Those are the only 2 districts in downstate New York where we don't have an advocate registered currently. Would very much like to get all of New York City represented on our map here. So please sign up if you are from those districts, but of course, wherever you're from, we want you. And then as you can see, we have some, much of upstate New York, where we need folks as well. So I'm going to stop there. And if you have any questions, please fire away.
I put in the link for those who want to sign up for the district mobilization map. Please do so. The link is in the chat. So we have a couple of questions. We have one that says, what are the top legislative issues United Spinal is following right now at this current moment?
So we have, we've got a lot of issues that we're focusing on. United Spinal, we made our reputation in transportation. It's United Spinal that got the buses accessible in New York City. It's United Spinal that has been working over so many years to get the subway accessible in New York City. It's United Spinal that has worked to get taxis accessible in New York City, to get the deplorable situation with curb cuts in New York City dealt with. Transportation is our bread and butter. And so, we've got a couple of issues at the federal level that we're focused on. There's a bill called the Disability Access to Transportation Act that was just reintroduced a couple of weeks ago by Congressman Jim Langevin from Rhode Island. This is a bill that would establish a one-stop paratransit pilot program. So if you take paratransit, that you would be able to not just, you'd have to go, from one place to one and schedule every leg of the trip, that you could actually, have a stop in the middle. So for example, you want to go somewhere, but you want to pick up a prescription on the way, or you want to drop your kid off at daycare. I think would make a big difference. Given the nature of paratransit, I think would make a big difference. It also would bring the process for reporting disability complaints to the federal government into the 21st century. So you'd be able to, if you have a complaint against a transit provider, you could make a phone call, you could send in a form via mail, or you could do it online. Right now, it's antiquated. It's, you only can send in through the mail. You can't, at this point, there's no accessible online process for reporting complaints is ridiculous. It would also give a big boost financially to a funding stream that funds a lot of the programs that get people with disabilities to have transportation access, the 5310 program. And then we've also got the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act that would also make additional improvements in air travel. So, transportation is our big bread and butter, but we're also focused on issues like home and community-based services. Making sure that people have their PCAs, making sure that people can stay at home and they don't have to go to nursing homes. And we were fighting since the beginning of the pandemic to get additional funding for home community-based services through Medicaid. That finally came through as part of the American Rescue Plan after fighting for it for a year. So that money is going to the states to get additional funding for home and community-based services. And there's a lot more that we're focused on. We're focused on voting rights. We're focused on a lot of stuff.
And with that being said, here the following persons ask, with the pandemic, the use of telemedicine has been so successful for so many of us. There is the Telehealth Modernization Act, 368, HR 1332, and Protecting Access to Post-COVID-19 Telehealth Act of 2021, HR 366. Is United Spinal following these?
Yeah, we are following the telehealth issue very closely. It's something we've been engaged in throughout the pandemic. It's something that actually I worked on in the Senate, the issue of telehealth, and the restrictions that had been in place for so long and that were eased during the pandemic. We've been working with various partners around the country at the federal level and at the state level as well. So I mean, in different states where there are various issues regarding telehealth. We're currently working with our Arkansas chapter, for example, right now on a bill in the Arkansas legislature. We've worked with Idaho, we've worked with Ohio. So, I mean, all across the country, we've been working on making sure that telehealth remains accessible and viable, certainly for our population. It's incredibly important.
Thank you. I'm going to answer the next question. The question is, I'm not sure if this is only for people with spinal cord injury or open to all. So Milagros, it's open to people who have disabilities. So it's spinal cord injury SCI/D. So Jessica is a member, you're a member, Betty's a member, Debbie's a member. I'm calling people out. And, for those who aren't members, I don't know if Kathleen is, you should absolutely be a member. So no, it's not only spinal cord injury. So the next question, we have interest of time. This is, what is USA's position on HR1?
Yeah, so I mean, that's
and S1.
Yeah, so it's a complicated answer. We currently do not have a formal position because there are some complications regarding the bill. We are a part of the National Coalition for Accessible Voting, which brings together a number of disability organizations as well as civil rights organizations around the issue of accessible voting. There are aspects to HR1 and S1 that are not great for our community. The paper ballot mandate, for example, is something that would disadvantage members of our community because the paper ballot is not accessible. So we are currently working in coalition with a number of other organizations to try and push back on the paper ballot mandate and work on some other issues regarding, for example, electronic ballot return, regarding research and development of methods of electronic voting that folks will find secure. I mean, we're engaged in that right now. I participate in weekly calls on that issue with the coalition. And so we're hopeful that we'll be heard on that.
Cool. Jessica, want to do the next one?
With so many important issues in play this year, why is using our advocacy efforts to secure recognition of United Spinal's 75th anniversary so important? Although I applaud and support everything USA has accomplished, wouldn't it be more worthwhile to focus our efforts on advocating for the things more concretely related to our members' well-being?
Yeah, and that's a good question, Deborah. We're not focusing on our 75th anniversary at the exclusion of anything. It is simply another thing that we are doing. And at the federal level, we have talked to Congresswoman Meng, for example, and she has agreed to go to the floor of the House and talk about our 75th anniversary and recognize it officially in the House, and then to also issue a proclamation later this year, timed around, we're having a big event for our 75th anniversary in November. We've also talked to Congresswoman McBath about our 75th anniversary, this is, going down the list. I mean, we've had these meetings, and it's certainly not the first thing on our list that we're advocating for. It's probably it's the last thing that we bring up, but we certainly, it's in ranking the, when you make a number of asks to a congressional office, I mean, there's the harder things, and then there's the easier things, right? And this is an easy thing to ask for. And so, at the federal level, that's something that we've been doing. But at the state level, I mean, it's a way to get folks involved. It's a way to celebrate our 75th anniversary and engage our chapters, engage our advocates, and give folks something that they can do to help celebrate our anniversary.
And finally, the last question would be, how does an organization join your coalition on voting?
The National Coalition for Accessible Voting, and I can, if I can find hold on. Let me find I'll get let me get the link here. I have the link. I'll put it in the chat here. But basically, National Coalition for Accessible Voting was convened by NCLE, the National Council on Independent Living. But there are, and if you look on the website, there are a number of other members that are members of the coalition: Paralyzed Veterans America, PVA, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, AAPD. I mean, I can go on, but I mean, there's, in terms of joining the coalition, again, I'd say probably going to NCLE, to Kelly Buckland at NCLE, would probably be the easiest way to go, because he's kind of the self-appointed leader of that thing.
Give me 1 second. I'll reshare it because it's shared on the.
Oh yeah, I see it.
And with that, if anyone had any follow-up questions, how do they reach out? You wanted to reach out to us, or would you like to share your email if they had any additional questions?
Yeah, so if anybody has any follow-up questions about, okay, people by phone cannot access it in chat box. So it's www.ncavoting.org is the National Coalition for Accessible Voting. In terms of contacting me, my email is slieberman@unitedspinal.org. That's SLIEBERMAN@unitedspinal.org.
All right, with that, I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank you, Stephen, for giving us the presentation. I want to thank you, Vladimir, for doing the ASL. Thank you for everyone for joining and wonderful questions. And thank Jessica, who I know has a hectic day today. So thank you very much and have a good day. Oh, and go sign up for the district mobilization. It helps you,
Everybody.
It helps us.
We want everybody. It doesn't matter if you have SCI, if you have neurological condition. If you don't, if your friends, if your family, we want everybody to sign up. So please sign up everybody that you can.
All right. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care.